weeks of your mission and mandate being here in Syria and all these observers and civilians. After 6 weeks of your mission and mandate being here in Syria and all these observers and civilians.
What do you know about the tactics the Syrian army is using against the opposition?
If you ask me what I know about the tactics of the Syrian army, my answer would be that I know very little about the tactics of the Syrian army, because that is not my job to follow or to find out. My job is to verify and report facts from the ground. What we have seen on the ground is that the attacks by the armed opposition on official building, on government checkpoints, and in other areas are becoming more effective, and the government is taking greater losses. What we are seeing on the government side is that the employment of artillery, mortars, army formations have become more what you would characterize as classical use of armed forces. Yeah, thank you.
Do you know something about this?
I don't have insight on the specific weapons available. What we're seeing is that the violence, the attacks are getting more effective.
There have been Russian helicopters used in the violence. Do you verify this? Do you have any?
As far as I'm concerned, the weaponry used by the Syrian government and the Syrian armed forces are Syrian weapons. When it comes to the posture of the mission in the coming days and weeks, I said initially that the mission is not static. There will be a review by the Security Council on the mission and its mandate. This is not directly connected to the increase in violence we have seen in the last days. It is simply because we are now 6 weeks into the mandate, and the expiry of the mandate is on the 20th of July. When that is said, obviously the discussions in the Security Council is going to be colored by the events on the ground. And it will be colored by the fact that the job that unarmed observers from more than 60 member states are doing on the ground is becoming increasingly risky. There is a concern among the member states providing observers that the risk level is approaching the level where they're not willing to accept it anymore. So the future of the mission obviously is in the hands of the Security Council. My message is that we have a tremendously important job to do on the ground, because whichever way you look at it, to have a factual voice on the ground that is there, more than 60 member states, together with the Syrian people. And as we have seen over the last 2 weeks, we are sharing some of the risks very clearly with them. So whichever way we go forward, the effort will be to seek, together with the assessments that will be made at the political diplomatic level, to seek the best role that will support a peaceful resolution of the Syrian crisis for the welfare of the Syrian people. That can mean adjustments, but that's not up for me to decide. I will give my inputs, obviously, to the Security Council and my masters in New York, but I'm not going to give that to the media.
Yeah.
Said armed groups. Did you find out that these armed groups really belong to one organization, or to can be named under one flag? Are they groups that are groups? Do you think
Yeah,
that
sure.
from your observation,
I'm with
are
you.
they under one flag, one
I'm with you.
organization?
Let me put it this way. One of the arguments that we hear very frequently is that the opposition, the political opposition outside Syria, is not developing into a mature organization, a mature entity that has credibility on the ground inside Syria. Inside Syria, what we are experiencing is that there are different situations in the different areas. There's one situation in Dera, there's another one in Homs, there's the third one in Aleppo, you have a fourth one in Deir ez-Zor. I don't have to repeat all the places, but these are different situations and they have local characteristics. And it's difficult to find one individual that executes command and control, to use the military term, over all these groups. So you can sit down and say, this is what we want to do, now we agree, and then we move forward based on the 6-point plan. So there is a fragmentation, there is a lack of unity on the political side, and also on the armed opposition side that is complicating the picture.
The civilians and the fighters were allowed to leave by the army.
As you know, we were not present on the ground during these events. If the scenario you described represents a scenario where the safety, the welfare of the civilian population is a paramount priority for those engaged in the armed fighting, then I would say, indeed, that's something that should...
The civilians and the fighters were allowed to leave by the army.
As you know, we were not present on the ground during these events. If the scenario you described represents a scenario where the safety, the welfare of the civilian population is a paramount priority for those engaged in the armed fighting, then I would say, indeed, that's something that should always be a key element in the thinking for those engaged in the fighting. Apart from that, what happened and how it was facilitated, I don't have any details that I can share. Thank you. They usually say that Norwegians and Danes and Swedes are basically the same thing, right?
Yeah. I'd like to ask, I talked to a local Syrian citizen the other day. They're telling the story. Now, I couldn't give him the answer, but I was hoping maybe you could give this man an answer of why the UN is often not observing the actual fighting.
I don't think I'm qualified to predict that specific issue. If I return to how I have experienced since 2009 during my stays in Syria and now particularly during the mission, what I in my own way experience as the Syrian identity that Syrians are proud of is the fact that Syria has for many years been a society in which there was secularity. And that pride, coupled with the traditional hospitality, the warmth, the historical background of Syria, is something that is eagered for by everyone. I've seen the reports about the sectarian lines as you have seen, but I think my message would be to, in particular, everyone outside Syria who tries to simplify the Syrian crisis into one dimension, that would be an oversimplification and a mistake. It's a complicated situation. There's many opportunities to, let's say, try to jump on one conclusion instead of trying to look at the whole picture. And this is also a main reason why UNSMIS still has an extremely valuable role to play on the ground to be able, with the absence of violence, with the reduction in violence, to verify facts. And in all our reporting, we don't tell stories. We don't go somewhere and hear something and experience something, and then we decide whether we believe the story or we don't believe the story, and we tell the story. We report the facts the way we have seen them. This is extremely valuable because that helps to bring this complicated speculative picture, when they narrow it down to one factor, down to realities on the ground. The incident has occurred, possible to see on the ground the remains